Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel today. Obviously, once again, we are on location. We're here at the LA Rifle and Revolver Club. As you can see behind me, but what you can't see is the rest of the room. It's a pretty prestigious club. You see a lot of competitive shooters be very successful coming out of here, and that's kind of what we're going to be talking about today. Here with us, we have Peter Neal, who has been a lifelong shooter, and I'm hoping can bring some perspective to the handicap community within the firearms community to us. As well, we have David Kimes, who is the 1980 U.S. Olympic shooting team's captain. He is also a CRPA board member. He has multiple world championships in competitive shooting. Guys, thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you for having us here.
But before we get into that, I just want to remind you guys, it is working. Please be sure and like, share, and subscribe to the channel. We want to keep hitting these milestones. It really helps with the algorithms to get the information out to as many people as possible, because that's the goal at the end of the day, to bring this litigation, legislation, and cultural education to as many people as possible. So guys, I just kind of wanted to jump right into it here. Neal, maybe we can start with you. What is your experience in coming into the firearms community? What's it been like? I've already mentioned you're a lifelong shooter. So how is it as a child coming up? Did you engage with the firearms community to how you engage with them here today?
Well, when I started shooting, I was about 9 years old. I started shooting with my grandfather and father, and we would go hunting in places that you can no longer hunt. We used to hunt in Anaheim Hills. We used to hunt in Yorba Linda, Diamond Bar, and part of Placentia. Back then it was mostly orange groves. Most of Fullerton was orange groves. When I was growing up, from Harbor Boulevard to State College was orange groves all the way. There was no housing, no buildings, nothing there but orange groves. We could go out and go shooting anytime. It was not a big deal. Nobody cared. Growing up, I learned my father and my uncles went to Fullerton High School, and they all took guns to school with them every day and ammo. They were on the shooting team. They carried them to every class. They took them to shooting their whatever they did with their shooting team after school. So I have been using both I've shoot pistol, rifle, and shotgun. I've been, like I say, shooting since I was 9. I've never had an accident. I'm a big advocate on safety. I actually have my NRA shotgun certification as an instructor. I instruct a lot of young people in shooting, and I've been encouraging more disabled people to try to get into shooting. And of course, I myself am disabled. Having grown up right-handed, it's been a challenge. So one of the things I look for is I do have a lot of really old guns, and some of them are very difficult to take apart and put together. But some of the newer guns that come out now are push button, easy to take apart and put together, yet banned in California, and they're just 22s. And I don't understand why they're banning guns that are easier for people with dexterity issues to take care of them. It seems like, why do we not have ADA compliance in the gun industry in providing those with disabilities with a gun that's easier to maintain, take care of, clean, put back together?
Well, yeah, I definitely want to get into that, because there are a couple pieces of legislation that CRPA has challenged in court. So I definitely want to come back around to that. But David, what about you? How is it that you came into the firearms community? Obviously, as far as the competitive shooting sports is concerned, you kind of have a glowing record. Can you tell us about your experiences with the Olympic team? I'm especially curious about that 1980 Olympics team where, we ended up boycotting the Moscow Games. Can you share with us what your lifelong experiences have been within the community?
I was in middle school, and my parents and 2 sisters, we went to Lakeview, Oregon. And that's where great-great or maybe great-great-great-grandparents came across and covered wagons and settled in Lakeview and built a home. And so we were visiting there, and behind the door was a rifle. I said, "Dad, can we go shoot that rifle?" And he searched around and found some .22 ammunition, and we got a dirt bank with the tin cans. He showed me the safety, and so we did some of that shooting, and I thought that was great. So then a few years later, I'm in high school. I'm having lunch with a guy that I know pretty well and stuff. But and I mentioned that. He says, well, you ought to come out to the South Coast Gun Club. My dad's a coach. Without that conversation, I wouldn't be here today. So I went to South Coast Gun Club, which was located right where the UCI, University of California, Irvine, is now. And I went through the pro marksman, sharpshooter, and so on with the NRA program. And then that was into high school, and they had a Southern California Junior Rifle League in this area, and it was great because we could all meet like here maybe every 3 or 4 months, and there's 100 kids, and I got lots of good friends and stuff and was shooting. And then ended up going to University of California at Berkeley. They used to have an ROTC, a naval ROTC team, and so I shot with them, made All-American the only 2 years I was there, and was kind of giving up shooting as getting into my career after I graduated, working for the Auto Club of Southern California. November 22nd, 1963, President Carter's November 22nd, 1963, President Kennedy was assassinated. Everybody's talking about it, so they let us go home early from work. I opened my mail, says, greetings to the president. You're hereby drafted. Because I had kind of put shooting in the background and wasn't really going to pursue it much. So here I am in basic training, and I wrote a letter to the commander of the Army Marksmanship Unit at Fort Benning, Georgia, which President Eisenhower started in 1956 after the Melbourne Olympics, where in the shooting events, the Russians were at the top, Americans were at the bottom. And so Eisenhower wanted to get America more up to speed on shooting and competitive shooting and so on, and target shooting. And so I wrote to the commander when I was in basic training, and when I got out of basic, I got a chance to go there with a tryout. And so I was at Fort Benning, Georgia for a couple of years, shooting on the team, and I extended for 10 months because of the 66 World Shooting Championships in Wiesbaden, Germany. And I made that team, but it was an alternate, but I got to go. And that lit my fire. It really did. I got to train next to the best in the world, even though I didn't get the chance to shoot the batch. So then I came back and got out of the service, was going to more education after my 4-year degree. And I got a call about 4 in the morning from the Chief Army Reserve Office. Hey, Dave Congs. He says, we're starting an international Army Reserve shooting team. Would you like to join us? I says, yeah. And I was with them for like 22 or 23 years. And so without that, I wouldn't be here. But so in the 74 World Championships, I had made the 66, and the 70 was in Phoenix, Arizona. And then I was introduced to Al Coots, who was in charge of the Army Reserve International Service Rifle Team. Not international, but service rifle team. And so that kept me shooting big bore year round. And so then by the time 74 World Championships came along and I made that team, I was a little bit better than a lot of others because they only get into high power shooting a month or two before it's time to do that for the tryouts and stuff. I was doing it year round. And so at the World Championships there, here's 1,000 people in Thun, Switzerland, behind the firing line, kind of semi-enclosed, and they kept selling tickets because, see, in Switzerland, it's kind of the civilian military, civilian army. And I remember riding around in a train or on a bus, and people have automatic rifles with them and ammunition. Yeah. So, World Championships, 74. Like I said, 1,000 people behind it. They sold tickets because everybody in Switzerland loved the 300-meter shooting. And after I fired my last shot, I had 12 10s in a row kneeling, and they pull the target down and come up, and they do what they did with service rifle, but they also had the score up above you. And when that came up at 10 in my last shot, here's 1,000 people yelling and cheering, So anyway, so that gave me the world record. And then my goal 4 years later was to increase my world record. So I quit work in 1977, 78, 79, and part of 80 to train full time. And being in the Army Reserve team was great because they provided the ammo. That helped, a big, huge help. So in '78, then I increased my world record by a couple of points and achieved my goal there. So then it was back in really the '70s or '80s that I got involved with the CRPA because they had the state championships. And then I got to know Michael Sitnick, who was basically early days was running CRPA in his home and his garage. And so I got to meet him, but I didn't realize he was a World War II veteran and also a Korean veteran. But he never talked about that. So anyway, that got me involved with the CRPA, and I then was able to be elected to the board. And so I've been on the board on and off for a number of years ever since.
And it's my understanding that you've worked with a lot of different groups, whether they are veteran focused or youth focused. And before we get into, I guess, some of the meat like legislation or litigation, I got to ask, okay, 1980, the United States decides to boycott the Moscow Games.
Yeah, my not so favorite President Carter boycotted those Olympics.
So I can't even imagine what that phone call is like. But I got to say, I see the mass majority of our population in that moment throwing their hands up, so upset, taking off. This is BS kind of a thing. Yet what you seem to do is start rallying and start helping other people within the community learn how to shoot competitively. How do you come to that decision? How do you wrap your head around that?
Yeah.
What was that like going forward?
Being an Olympian has made such a huge difference. Even though it was the boycott, that was just a small bump in the road for me. When I worked with the Wounded Warriors and when I worked with the juniors, I've got credibility. I'm just not some guy off the street trying to coach them. And so for me, that was just a little bump on the road, and it's a huge thing to have that credibility when I'm coaching the juniors here at this club, as well as especially the Wounded Warriors. And I sent you that one thing, that long treatise by one of the Wounded Warriors that was just talking. I had no idea that I was affecting him in that such a great positive way. That's great. Pull a tear to my eye on that.
Yeah. Well, we constantly see legislation turning into law that's negatively impacting specific communities. We were talking a little bit before we turned the cameras on here just on, the importance on unifying all of these kind of separate communities within the Second Amendment community. I see a couple of them here. There are obviously many more, but I wanted to talk about a couple pieces of legislation, and even that turns into a lawsuit, right? So we had, the handgun roster as part of the Unsafe Handgun Act. Neil, it's been around for decades now. Basically has created a situation where handguns, are not able to, pass the tests that California has put into it, largely in part lately because of the micro-stamping requirements that, basically cut everything off. I don't even know how many new firearms. There hasn't been many that have come into California since the micro-stamping requirements. CRPA has filed a lawsuit against the Unsafe Handgun Act in general, but we did get a good decision from a federal district court that would basically say the handgun roster is unconstitutional. That is now being challenged in the Ninth Circuit. But this largely has to do with accessibility to firearms and firearms parts. What does that law and what does that lawsuit coming from CRPA mean to you when you are looking for an increase in accessibility to help you continue and shoot?
Well, not just myself, but anybody who has dexterity issues is going to have a lot of trouble with some of the guns, even if you're just a fun shooter who just likes to target shoot or plink for fun. Having a gun that you can easily disassemble and reassemble with reduced dexterity is very, very important to us. So the ban on basically just for an example, I know that Ruger makes 41 different models of the Ruger Mark IV, which is a push-button disassembly, snap-together reassembly. Awesome. I actually got to get my hands on one. But in California, of the 41 models, only one is allowed, and it's the heavy bull barrel. Most people who have dexterity issues don't want a heavier gun. They'd like this little factory stock lighter gun for doing target shooting. So that one's still on the banned list. That's what I would like. I don't need a heavy gun. I don't need a bull barrel. But again, we have laws that don't necessarily make sense some of the time. I'm not sure I understand why they're all banned in the first place. And as far as the microstamping, do they actually have microstamping on some of these pistols now?
Well, that's actually the thing. So by California's requirements or by California's regulations, the mass majority of the firearms that are currently on our handgun roster have been grandfathered in. So technically, most of the firearms that we have that are handguns are deemed by California as unsafe handguns, which is a little bit ironic, right? Because they're trying to make something safe, but nothing can actually pass muster. And what that really comes down to is, first of all, the technology doesn't exist. At least not as something that can be mass produced. And even if it did, are manufacturers really going to up their own costs just to get into the California market? So those are basically the two big things. But the answer to the question is no. There's not a whole lot of microstamping on firearms in California because there are no external firearms that really pass all the regulations that would even force something to have microstamping on it.
Well, a gun in itself is not unsafe. Only the user makes the situation unsafe. No gun is unsafe by itself. A gun on the table can't do a doggone thing. So it all boils down to following the rules on safety, safety, safety. And I work with young people. I teach minors how to shoot. And with the group that I work with, in 100 years, they've only had one accident. One in 100 years of doing service with young people shooting. So I don't think it's the gun that's the issue. I think our state is just trying to come up with reasons to eliminate guns, which leads into I don't know what. I don't know what they have against them other than they're just a tool for a use, whether it's hunting, whether it's competition, whether it's just shooting for fun.
Yeah, and especially within the competitive shooting sports niche of this, I happen to remember an argument that our lobbyist Rick Travis was making up at the Capitol. He and don't directly quote me on this because I might be butchering a little bit, but if I remember correctly, the argument that he was making is, you literally have over 8 million trigger pulls in high school competitive shooting sports with 0 accidents. We have ambulances posted at high school football games for every game. Same thing with colleges. So so if you want to talk about, specifically with football, if you want to talk about the lethality, I can understand maybe a lethality argument, but how about a repetitive argument? Because it seems to be happening in one area with no legislation, and then you have all of this legislation in this other area where it's literally happening 0 out of all 8 million trigger pulls. And that is in large part due to firearm safety training. And that's what I think the opposite side doesn't really get about the firearms community in general. We are huge on safety and training. It is hammered into us from day one, and it is something that has been perpetuated. I think that's the best part of this community, and you end up getting stats like that because of that. But while we're at this, I did want to also talk about Assembly Bill 2571, which has turned into our Junior Sport Magazine versus Bonta, which is on appeal at the Ninth Circuit right now. This is the lawsuit that basically... Well, it's Gavin Newsom staying true to his promise, which is I'm going to end firearms culture in California. But what this one specifically did was told us we could not advertise to youth in the state. It's a very murky law that was written. It had a couple of exemptions added to it at the very end when CRPA threatened a lawsuit. Obviously, the exemptions were put in there, but we're still going forward with the lawsuit. David and ultimately both of you guys, if you are working with kids, how do laws like this impact you, and what does the lawsuit mean to you?
Yeah, that was an impact that we shut down our junior program for a little while because of that, until we got the do's and don'ts and make sure that the junior is there with the parent, and there's parental control and so on. So we weren't too much in the advertising, except we had to shut down our website as well, our junior shooters website. So that was really a negative thing that we couldn't believe he did that. And then he signed it and went into effect right then, rather than wait until the first of the year like a lot of legislatures. I mean, that had big room for improvement on intelligence and what the goals were for that.
Yeah, and I mean, being written so in such a murky way, and then having that clause that does enact it immediately, it kind of shocked our system, right? A lot of people in the community just didn't know what to do, so they stopped everything, because when you have a $25,000 fine for every single incident, it has the potential to shut you down pretty quick. So people just sort of shut down. Neil, did you experience anything with that law in working with kids?
There was a brief hold on some of the instruction, but it was very, very brief, because our group has a pretty good group of people who figure it out pretty fast, and we were back up pretty quick. I didn't see much of a layover, maybe a month or two, but other than that, everything seemed to go smoothly, and I think it's the most fun I ever had. And one of the things that I have had the opportunity to do with working with young people is occasionally we've had a young person with a disability who would come up to the range where we're going, and we got kids shooting, and they would watch, and they'd watch me instruct, and I'd ask them if they want to shoot. No, I'm not going to. No, I'm not going to. But after a while, I'm going to try it. You get them up there. Sometimes they can't hold the shotgun up all the way, and I will use my hand to help kind of hold up the barrel. And maybe they didn't hit anything, but they had a good time. And sometimes they do hit stuff, and then they really get excited about it. So I would say, when it comes to youth learning to do things and learning to use a tool to accomplish the task of hitting a piece of skeet or a target or a paper or whatever, gives them a lot of self-confidence. When they walk away from there, they're walking taller. They're proud of what they did and tried to do. So I see it as a tool of building confidence.
What exactly does it mean to you, to have organizations like CRPA helping identify what these murky laws are, and then ultimately fighting against them in court, fighting against them in the legislature, but ultimately communicating with the public in a decipherable way?
Yeah, that's huge, really, because none of us were aware of all these other challenges with respect to firearms and the Second Amendment and so on happening. We were just focused on our little part of the shooting sport. And so this was huge to realize that without the CRPA, how bad things could be getting in California. And the media's on the other side, so the media's not giving us anything that's important to us. So that's my really realization that how the California Rifle and Pistol Association, and especially that being on the board for a while, really gave me that feeling that, hey, they're doing some great things. They really are. And without them, the wheels would come off.
Well, we are certainly going to continue fighting these things in the legislature as well as in the courtroom, and continuing to try and inform as many people as we can. Gentlemen, I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your experiences and thoughts with us today.
My pleasure. And CRPA, keep up the great work. You're just like a farmer, outstanding in your fields.
I'll say this: it's got me more informed in looking up and staying more current in the laws. And one of the ones that came around in California at the beginning of this year, if you're moving a pistol in your vehicle, it must be in a FAA-approved metal container, locked, when you're going to and from the range now. You can't just put it in your trunk. Don't do it. Do not get caught unaware. Get the box. It's not that much.
And if you like videos like these and want to continue understanding the cultural and Second Amendment movement in California, including litigation and legislation, please be sure and like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Again, we're trying to get this out to as many people as possible. It really helps with the algorithms. Thanks, guys. We'll see you on the next one.